So hi everybody, I just wanted to give you a lowdown of what I experienced yesterday when I attended the New Zealand Trauma Conference in Christchurch. I had the incredible privilege to be with Bessel Kolk for a whole day in an auditorium with only about 1,000 people, which must be unheard of for a personality of his caliber. For those of you who don't know him, Bessel Kolk is a psychiatrist. He was a professor at Harvard, and he leads one of the, I think he does still, one of the leading trauma research centers in the world. He's in his 80s, and the beauty about people in their 80s is that they don't care anymore about their academic position, and they don't care about, hurting anybody that could affect their career. This man had an incredible presence. He exuded kindness and knowledge. He was self-examining. He recognized everything that he did wrong in his early career. His wife was there, and she guided us through a mindfulness embodied practice, and that was incredible as well. So anyway, let me try to summarize what I learned. So just like in his book, trauma has been around for centuries and has been recognized, except it is a political topic because no ruler who sends men to war wants to recognize that they're coming back injured and to the point where they don't function anymore. So it has been a topic that has remained on the underground for many, many years. And it started being talked about with World War II, really, when people were bombshelled. But even that term was banned because it was detrimental to the governments who were sending people to war. But even Darwin explored this concept in one of his books. So it is a long and old concept. It's always been around. The other thing is that trauma doesn't need to be war or something incredibly exceptional. It could be something relatively minor that happened, except you didn't have the capacity to process it into a form memory. So people who have trauma are carrying that impression around with disjointed elements, sensorial elements. So let's say that you had a car crash and you almost died, then you don't have a formed memory of that event. You have snippets of it. And what you remember is the smell of the burning petrol. You remember the sound of the voice of the people who were trying to rescue you. You remember the feeling in your body of being compressed in your car that got smashed. Those are the things that people remember. So as you can hear from what I explained, it's very much in your body. It's a sensorial compilation of an event that you didn't get over. And so what happens when that memory is not processed is that you lose the pleasure of being in a safe body. Because if you go to the supermarket and you happen to listen or hear a sound that reminds you of that accent, you're going to be triggered. And you find yourself doing insane things that are automatic and uncontrollable. And then people look at you as if you're weird. And this is what was happening with veterans, and still happens with veterans. There could be a sound or maybe a word that is said that triggers the old memory, and they come up with an automatic response. Now, a big part of Bessel's talk was also about what has been tried and what works. And so CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, and it's one of the favorite methods of treating people in psychology, has very poor results with trauma, very, very poor, compared to some weird techniques like EMDR. I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but it's basically you're moving your eyes around as you recall a memory. And there's also other processing. I'm not a trained EMDR therapist, so I can't give you specifics. But EMDR has much more success in treating trauma than talk therapy does. That was really interesting. He also talked about neural feedback, which is another process in which you get electrodes on your brain and you're basically interacting with a machine, and it's all about reteaching your neural pathways to react with calm to different stimuli. Finally, at the end of the afternoon, he spoke about psychedelics and how psychedelics, he expressed that in his lifetime has been the biggest advance in the whole of psychiatry as much as he knows and has practiced it. So what happens with psychedelics is that people enter a state of trance, which interestingly was very pleasant for me to hear because I'm a hypnotherapist, and he said that up till the 1990s, trauma patients were treated with hypnosis. And what happens now with the advent of psychedelics is that we're basically entering a state of trance, very similar to hypnosis, but it's induced by a drug. So you don't have to make the effort to relax people and get them into a trance state. And in that trance state, then people can reorganize that memory and process those feelings that they're carrying in their bodies. Very important, he said, is that the effect of the psychedelics is setting dependent. So when done properly, a psychedelic psychotherapy session is done in a very safe setting, and you're being observed by facilitators, by psychotherapists, by psychiatrists who are with you, accompanying you in that journey so that it remains safe. And his greatest concern is that with psychedelics going into the pharmacological commerce, so they become a drug that then the pharmacological companies are going to administer and try to get in the market, that these would be used prescribed by doctors as if it was the drug that does the effect, as opposed to it is the drug and the setting and the facilitator that renders the effect of helping people with trauma process it. The drug that has had the greatest success with PTSD has been MDMA. And again, that is when it is utilized in the therapeutical setting with facilitators. For me, one of the takeaways, and I got that from the book as well when I read it many, many years ago, was that you cannot talk yourself out of trauma. It's an embodied experience, and the way out is through the body. So in his center, they get people to do Tai Chi, they do yoga. Another thing that they do is theater, particularly Shakespeare, because he says, for example, if you're a trauma victim and you're used to having this identity of having been destroyed really by that trauma, and suddenly you get to be King Lear, that allows you to embody a completely different experience of what it's like to be human. And that in itself is very healing. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned something. Read the book. It's an amazing book. And explore these avenues of embodiment if you or a loved one has gone through trauma and you need to process it and resolve it. Thank you for listening.